reading this morning comes from Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. This is what Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established. As chief among the mountains, it will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, O house of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." Our second scripture reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24. And I invite Mary Ann to come and share that with us.
People were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with handmill, and one will be taken and the other left. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have left his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him.
So I had originally planned to do a little series on called "Are We There Yet?" I don't know if you can call it a series if we're only going to do 2 weeks now that we missed the first one. But I am going to try to wrap both of the themes of hope and peace together this week. So as many of you know, the season of Advent is a special time in our congregation's life. Advent is a time of color and joy, light, and anticipation. And it's also a time that we enter into a spirit of deep worship because we celebrate the fact that the Creator of the universe put on skin and came down and took on the most humble, lowly role that a person could take. But Advent isn't just a reminder of that past event, but it's also an anticipation of what is yet to come. And in fact, the word Advent, which comes from the Latin word venio, meaning to come, and ad, meaning to or is more than what was expected. And so it's less a remembrance of the first coming and more about anticipating what will come later. And so, folks, I invite us to remember that we are on a journey. Each and every one of us is on a journey. I think Kyle and Aaron's video demonstrated the journey that they have had within the last year. Each one is filled with positive things, with challenges, and even just some of the ordinary, everyday things. And sometimes I think it can be hard to focus on God and focus on our journeys when we are constantly bombarded by a culture that, passes what I call holigivingness. Okay, you go to a store and you've got 3 holidays already out from the time of Halloween all the way through Christmas, and you constantly got all of these things that come and go. We've got shopping to do, we've got Christmas parties, we've got family events, and we run here and there, and we're pulled in all of these different directions that sometimes we can lose focus. So how do we live in balance, and how do we anticipate what is to come even as we celebrate these great traditions that many of us enjoy? So I have an opening reflection, a couple of questions for you, and you can feel free to share your responses to these if you wish. So the first is, if you could take a trip anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? Greece, because you like mythology? Well, you make sure to pack me in your suitcase when you go, okay? I'll even pay for the overweight fee, which might be too much.
You're better to buy a ticket.
I think you're right, David. All right, so Greece, I'm on board with that. Anyone else want to share where they might go, if they could?
Heaven.
You're in church, David. The answer's always that. So what would you have to do to get to that place that you might like to go? Do the laundry? Okay. So again, some of us would have to maybe make some changes in our lifestyles. Maybe we'd have to work a little more to earn a little more money. Maybe we'd have to save a little bit more money. Maybe some of us would have to rearrange work and family schedules to get the time off to go. There's a number of things that could come up. And yet, sometimes we think of these far away and exotic locations like Greece and Italy or China or some different place like that. And yet one of my fondest journeys is just a simple thing that I would take with my grandpa, which is an hour and a half away from here to a little town called Gordon, Wisconsin, where there's nothing but a gas station and a broken down bowling alley, and yet I've had so many memories of that wonderful place and spending time with my grandparents. And that will always be part of one of my journeys. But the thing I'd like you to think about is that journey always begins with an awareness and a choice. So the first is that you have to be aware that there's an opportunity there. Or you have to take or make a choice to say, you know what, I'm going to go on this journey. I'm willing to leave behind what is good and comfortable, and I'm willing to take the risk to go someplace new. And maybe if it's only an hour away, maybe it's not that far from being comfortable, but it still requires some action. It still requires a choice. Now, there's a number of ways we can show up on a journey. When we talk about places that we really want to go, we can tend to be excited and, be eager to go, but sometimes we can be grumpy. Sometimes we can feel like the backseat passenger that kind of just gets dragged along kicking and screaming because they don't want to go. Or maybe if you're like my kids, you fight all the way to wherever the destination is. We just took a trip to Wisconsin Dells, and I have to say, as the driver, I was kind of a grumpy driver. I didn't really care to go on the trip in the first place, but I knew it meant a lot to my kids, so I was willing to go and do that. But from the time we got on the highway to the time we pulled off for a bathroom break at Black River Falls, all I heard in the back seat was a and as every good parent does, they give that big warning that says, if you two boys don't knock it off, I'm going to turn this car around right now. And much to my dismay, Trajan shrieked one more time, and I said, boys, what in the world is going on back there? And Trajan just eloquently says, but Dad, he's smiling at me. And so the journey looks different for all of us, and we all can take on many different roles. Now, as we look at our scriptures today, and I'm going to have to really get moving here, so I'm going to have to apologize for going through this really fast. But one of the things we look at in the gospel right away is that no one knows the time that the Father will come, or that the time that Jesus will return. Not even Jesus says, only the Father knows. And so I would remind us that we are already part of something bigger, something that goes beyond us, something that is beyond our control. Now, we live in a society where that type of thinking might cause us a lot of angst. We like to be in control. We like to kind of set our own destiny, and the thought of something like that can cause some anxiety. But how great is it to know, if you're thinking about taking a journey, that God the Father is the driver. That He's the one driving the car, the truck, steering the ship, flying the plane, whatever metaphor you want to use. I think there's some real comfort, some real peace that can be found in that. And when we talk about peace, there's a number of different definitions and ways it's used, even in the biblical text. So sometimes in the Bible we use peace as a greeting or a farewell. Most of us probably think of peace as the absence of conflict. And yet, at its heart, peace really, biblically, represents this sort of wholeness or this wellness, this deep fulfillment. And I think that's what Kyle was alluding to when he talked about the fact that he said, we were just more at peace than we should have been. So when they had turned their focus onto God, that this overwhelming peace just came and saturated them, that they felt whole, that they felt fulfilled, even in the midst of what might be one of the most difficult situations and journeys of their lives. Now the scriptures go on to tell us that there were many people that were not paying attention, that they didn't even know that a trip and a journey was going on. And it says that even in the days of Noah, people weren't paying attention. They were engaged in all of these other activities, and they didn't know until the rains started to come that something else was going on. Now, again, as we read Scripture, we know that God wasn't happy with the people, that there was a lot of sin and stuff that He did not like. But the things that they list here are not necessarily bad things. They're just normal earthly things that we do that are part of our everyday journey. They're not bad. The problem is when we get so focused on the earthly and we fail to recognize and pay attention to the spiritual, to the supernatural, we find ourselves in trouble. And so as we go through this Advent period, I invite us to pay attention. Advent is about anticipation. It's about waiting for that second coming of Jesus Christ. So the scriptures again inform us, you know what? Keep watch so that you will be ready when the Lord comes. So how do we do that in this day and age? How do we keep watch? How do we get ready like the master who, if he had been ready and been awake, would have been aware that the thief was trying to break into his house? Well, in many ways, I think it's much like carving. And Marianne, you're going to have to help me here because this is way out of my field. But when it comes to carving something, generally people take, for instance this, they take a full block and they carve away everything that doesn't need to be there. And they create what they're focused on, which is the picture right in the middle. Now this is supposed to be, and I realize because you guys are looking at the same way that people in New Auburn kind of go, it's supposed to be a nativity scene. Okay? It's supposed to represent the manger and be a nativity scene. And I do have to give a shameless plug. This is not my picture. And if you want to purchase this carving, you can do so for $38.95 at ZachsJerusalemGifts.com. And so hopefully he'll be all right that I borrowed the picture to use in this sermon. But that's really the way it is in life, is that in order to live in the kind of peace that we desire, we have to carve away everything that's not focused on God. And we need to reorient those normal, everyday, mundane things and order them according to the way God has set out. And so let's move on to hope now. And we look at hope from Isaiah's vision of this mountain of the Lord, that the temple will be established and it will be high above all of these things. And now hope in the scriptures, again, is a word that we kind of think of, I kind of wish for this. But that's not what hope represents in the biblical text. Hope is almost always associated with a certain kind of faith. That we have hope in salvation, that we have a hope and understanding that Jesus is who he says he is, that God will do the things that God says he will do. And so our hope is really tied to our faith. All right? So for those of you that want some practical things, how do we choose peace in our families, in our churches, our communities, or even on social media? What does it look like to carve away all of the junk that creates conflict? And how do we respond in a way that makes us fulfilled, that makes us whole? Sometimes it can be tough, even in our own families there's conflict. I gave you an example of the boys going at each other. In our house, it's really hard for me and Sarah, because Sarah's always right and I'm never wrong. And so sometimes it's really hard to have peace. But yet, what does it mean that when there's conflict that we're able to quickly apologize and say, you know what, I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry that I did that. And that creates that peace. What happens then when we boldly proclaim the reign of God? When we step into that hope and say, you know what, I don't know about you, but this is what God has done in my life. I don't know where you believe, I don't even care what you believe, but this is what God's done in my life. I invite you to maybe consider this, to take a look at it. Oftentimes I think when we talk about spreading the good news and the gospel, we think about walking around with a tract or walking up to somebody at the coffee shop going, hey, are you saved? Let me tell you my testimony. All right? That's not the way it has to be. We can simply share the message in our everyday body language, our conversations, and the actions we do by just treating people with the dignity and the respect, and again, allowing God to open up those doors and inviting those people to realize that just as we are on a journey, that they too are on a journey and that we can walk alongside of them. So some action steps for you this morning. Are you paying attention? Are you actively living out your life and waiting for Christ to return? Are there one or two things that will help you refocus, reorient, to carve away some of the things that are distracting you in this season of Advent and Christmas? Secondly, how can you be an advocate of peace and hope during this Advent season? I invite you to engage in conversations and activities that promote these in your personal life, in your family, in your church, and in your community. And so I would say, be what you want to manifest. So if you go out and you are peaceful and